This is the Baunfire Gamescast, episode 377. I am Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Xbox's leadership shakeup, marathons, server slam, and my thoughts about it, PlayStation pulling back from PC, potentially, and much more. First, be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and or Twitch subscribers. And if you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description for my other content, merch, and more. Well, let's get into it. We're in for a doozy here. I wrapped up the podcast last week. I rendered the video. I posted the video. It was all about PlayStation shutting down Blue Point. And then I want to say, like, right when the podcast went live was when all the news dropped about Xbox. So if you haven't been paying attention this last week, Phil Spencer, who's been head of Xbox, I think was it 14 years or something like that, but has been at Xbox for almost 40 years, is retiring. He announced that. It looks like it was supposed to happen this Monday of the week that I'm recording this. That's on 2/27/26. But on Friday, I guess IGN notified Microsoft, like, hey, we have a scoop on this story. We know that Phil's retiring. So we're gonna post that. And then Xbox kind of quickly shuffled out all their stuff. There were some ramifications to that, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But yeah, big news, pretty crazy. Phil leaving isn't that surprising to me. At least he's not a young guy. I mean, he's young-ish. He's 60, I believe. But he's been there for almost 40 years. He's done the work. He's honestly been in his position with Xbox longer than you would have imagined someone would. In the same time that he's been there, I think PlayStation has had 2 or 3 people equivalent to him. And Nintendo has had at least 2 or 3, if not more. They're actually just getting a new one, I think, this year. And Phil was just unique because, he's just so much more customer facing than a lot of the kind of CEOs and all that stuff. They, like Doug Bowser, I saw some interviews and stuff with him, and I'm sure he did some interaction with their consumers, but not really. He's just there running the company, making the decisions, doing whatever people in that position do. Herman Hulst now, and previously Jim Ryan at PlayStation, they would make some public statements, but they weren't tweeting people, right? Where Phil was, and Phil has been his entire career. And for better or worse, that's been kind of a thing, right? I think that for Xbox fans, especially, there's a bit of fanboyism and stuff like that with him. The fact that you could, tweet him and tag him and there's a decent chance he would respond or acknowledge it or like it, that obviously you're going to become a personal fan. And that kind of goes beyond, what you think about what Xbox is doing, decisions they're making, things that are happening with them. And I think all of that played into how visceral the reaction was to this and everything that's happened, which we'll talk about. Because I think that even people who weren't fans of Xbox, or maybe didn't even think that Phil was doing a good job or had done a good job, which I think it's kind of hard to say he didn't, especially early in his tenure. He really brought Xbox back from a rough Xbox One launch. And by the end of that generation, I think reestablished their credibility to a point. Maybe the series launch hasn't been as successful, but that's, that's an opinion, right? But I think even people who didn't like him or who aren't Xbox fans still see him as like a pillar in gaming, right? And for him to be gone, it's kind of strange. I think it's like similar to when Reggie left at Nintendo. He was definitely much more interactive with community and stuff like that than, really than Nintendo or PlayStation tend to be. And so when he left and Bowser replaced him, and now the lady who's replacing him, they probably aren't going to be out there shooting off tweets, right? And And I feel like that's just, people feel that loss. And with Phil being gone, whether you like him or not, it's weird. It's a strange, it's a big change. And humans don't really like change very much. So the other part of this is that Sarah Bond is resigning or has resigned already. The big drama here was that Sarah didn't post anything. Xbox put out all these letters from Satya Nadella, from Phil, from Asha Sharma, who we'll talk about shortly, who's taking Phil's job, from Matt Booty, who's being promoted, who's obviously been around for a long time. There was no Sarah, and finding out about the story that IGN was going to break this early, it's very likely, it seems like, that Sarah just didn't have her statement prepared yet, which I don't think she was surprised by this on Friday. I suspect she was surprised by this a few weeks ago when they made this decision and got the ball rolling. But we'll talk about that in a moment. So the person replacing Phil is Asha Sharma. She was most recently with the head of one of the departments, one of the divisions at Microsoft for AI. That has clouded people's thoughts on her taking over quite a bit. For me, digging into it, she doesn't really seem like she's super AI focused. It just seems like she's all about whatever she's currently working on. She has stints before working at Microsoft, working on Instacart, working on Facebook, on their Meta program, and on Facebook Messenger. And actually, her first job that she has listed on her LinkedIn was working a couple years in Microsoft's marketing department, where supposedly she worked with Xbox during that time. So, it's kind of a full circle moment for her, I guess. And then Matt Booty, who's been there for a long time, was promoted to kind of second in command, replacing Bond essentially as the chief content officer. So he's not president of Xbox the way that Bond was. That they are kind of redistributing titles there, I guess. So there's a lot to get into. So what I will say is I have it on good authority, and I'm not going to source it. I trust what I've heard and who I've heard it from, that there's a lot of rumors right now about whether or not Phil is voluntarily retiring or not. I'm under the impression he is not volunteering to do this necessarily. He's playing along, right? He did. There's videos out there of at Xbox headquarters of him announcing the switchover, literally handing it off to Asha, who is there. He's making the tweets. He's doing the thank you tour. So he doesn't seem like completely put off by what's happening. Again, he likely planned to retire soon either way. The 25th anniversary celebration is expected to be this coming November in 26. I think a lot of people expected him to do that and then retire. So him, leaving months earlier than that is kind of strange. And it leads credence to this rumor. I don't even really want to call it a rumor. I trust the source I have, that this wasn't the timing he was planning on. But I suspect that there was kind of you can retire and leave on your own accord, or at least make it look that way, or you'll be gone either way. And that seems like what happened. So it is cool that, he's sticking around through the summer to help Asha transition and help her get up to speed, which is really good. And if this relationship was completely soured and broken, he probably wouldn't do that. I really, really hope that in November, I'm assuming they're going to do some kind of showcase or celebration stream or event or something. And I really, really hope he's part of that they bring him back. Honestly, it'd be cool to see them bring back a bunch of the people, from previous, from back in the day, who kind of got Xbox going and who have been part of it, like Peter Moore and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how broken or not this relationship really is with Phil, on kind of what happens around the anniversary. Bond is a different case. Sarah Bond, she was pretty. It seemed that everyone just assumed she was next up when Phil did retire, and that's not what happened. And some articles have gone up since then. Some rumors that a lot of the initiatives that seem to be kind of not the most popular in the PlayStation community, like the big multi-platform push, which I don't really think is that unpopular, but if you listen to the people who jabber online all the time, you would say it is, as well as them, which I do agree here, that this whole thing of like, this is an Xbox and really kind of making the identity of Xbox very cloudy and not very clear. I'm a big fan of cloud and TVs having access and all that stuff. But I think that it was almost very kind of dismissive to their own hardware and people who buy their hardware and have spent many, many thousands of dollars on their hardware over the years to do this push. And supposedly that was an initiative really pushed by Sarah. Some of the rumors were that this was her like her real her like defining moment, almost, that she was really trying to kind of define her time at Xbox by pushing this big thing that's been happening for a few years, and that supposedly it's extremely unpopular internally, kind of insulting to a lot of people who have been there for a long time, and that there was a lot of friction with that decision. These rumors were interesting in some articles about them because some other ones went even deeper into like, basically if you didn't do things exactly the way she wanted or agreed with everything, then, you would get like fired, that you wouldn't be there anymore. There were articles like calling her difficult to work with and stuff. That gets into a weird thing. If you've paid attention to the history of, of misogyny and racism and sexism and all that stuff, what I will say, my take on it, not that anyone's really asking, but here it is that it's probably true that her initiatives, things that she was leading up, that Phil also had to approve, and people above Phil also had to approve. They aren't, blameless here, but that these initiatives probably were pretty unpopular because it was like, especially to like veterans of Xbox who were still there, it probably felt like they were kind of sullying the brand, right? I also suspect there's some scapegoating happening here, and maybe it's just because she was second in command. Maybe it's because she's a woman. Maybe it's because she's a black woman. That all of those things, there's likely not a yes or no or a binary, blame happening here. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe those initiatives were her babies and that she was pushing them hard and that they maybe weren't popular and that maybe she was hard to work with. Who knows? But that some of this is also coming from places that we really shouldn't still be dealing with in 2026. But long story short, for Bond, she's young, she's very smart, is climbing the corporate ladder one way or the other. She's going to end up with some awesome cushy job as a CEO in like any industry. She's going to end up in like the chicken making industry or something. I don't know. I say that because she's already on the board of Tyson. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Now moving over to Asha Sharma, the new CEO, the new head of Xbox. It's a kind of a weird placement, right? We've never heard of her before, at least most of us haven't. She isn't super involved in games in general, doesn't have a history of doing that, but for what it's worth, has been saying all the right things and seems to have, very likely from her conversations with Phil and Booty and everyone involved, seems to have an idea of what they need to do to get the brand back on track. And like, if you look at her history, she has a history of, increasing engagement and getting brands back on track and expanding those things and making them more successful. Now, no matter what you think of Facebook and Meta and Facebook Messenger or Instacart or some of these brands, it's not her job to make you like them necessarily. It was her job to get people to use them. And she was very successful at that. Her interviews that she's done and the statements that she's made since she took over Xbox is a big thing she's talked more about hardware in the last week than I feel like Xbox has in the last 5 years. And so in these meetings that she's had, these interactions she's had, however she got hired, there seems to have been a really big focus on, we're going to refocus on consoles. I'm sure they're not going to drop all these other initiatives, but it does seem like they have kind of picked up that people weren't really a big fan of how almost dismissive they've become of their own hardware and their consoles, and in turn the people who, are using those devices, and how a lot of those people feel kind of left behind and thrown away. She's talked a lot about how they won't force AI usage into the creation of their games, and how games are art and they're made by people and all this stuff. They've reiterated a few times that Microsoft isn't pushing them or forcing them or any of the studios to use AI. One of the funny accusations that she got was that her tweets that she was putting out kind of like awkward tweets of being like, hey everyone, what's your favorite game? Like doing real obvious, like, hello fellow children kind of stuff. Which I think she was just, I suspect she may not have fully comprehended what she's getting herself into. She seems like a quick learner though. I'm sure she knows by now. But people were accusing her of using AI for her tweets, and she very, very pointedly clapped back. I think it was that Ryan McCaffrey from IGN of like, oh yeah, basically making a statement of, responding to some other things and being like, oh, and also I'm writing my own tweets. So I actually, she's very, I don't know if the word sassy is sexist or not, but she's very, she's clapping back on people, and I really appreciate it. She did interact with a few of the like chuds and some of the real weirdos in the games community, like Grums and stuff like that. And I hope it looks like someone on their side probably chimed in like, just don't deal with them. Just pretend those people don't exist. You're only setting yourself up for pain by bothering with those people. But it has been cool seeing her be pretty interactive. And then like the big part of her message in multiple places has been like a return to Xbox, like a return of the brand. She made a few statements that made people think like, oh, Xbox is going to go back to doing like full exclusives and stuff. I mean, you could interpret it that way. I would be surprised if she's even deep enough in the woods right now for them to be talking about that kind of stuff. I could always see them potentially going back to like a standard like 6-month or 12-month exclusivity window, maybe even longer. Right now we're at like Starfield that's been out for like 1.5 or 2 years. That still isn't on PlayStation, even though we expect it will be later this year. I've always been a pretty big proponent of that. I don't like the way that PlayStation did it with PC, which we'll talk more about in a bit, and how like they would release a game on PlayStation and then they would like, I swear they released some remasters of games. Actually, they did. Some of the PC versions were remasters that came like 3+ years later. And then we'll get into this anything later. I don't think that's a good decision. I think if you're going to do a window, if you want to give your console value, I would say you do a year exclusivity on your first party games to say, hey, if you want to play these now, these 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 games that you're seeing clips of and streamers play and all this stuff, you're going to need an Xbox or you're going to need a PC, which is kind of a unique situation compared to, say like a PlayStation or Nintendo. If you want to play these games day one, get our Xbox. It's going to be cheaper than an equivalent PC, especially right now. Or you wait and then you can play on PlayStation later. You can get those scraps when you get them, right? I've not liked how like Doom, the Dark Ages came out day one on PlayStation, other games where that's happened. I do think it kind of takes away that mysticism. Now, I also respected that it seems like Xbox was essentially, going off the wishes of their game devs, saying, hey, we're going to do what they want. If they want to be on everything day one and they can do it developmental wise, go nuts. If not, we won't do that. Kind of like this year, I believe, was it Fable? I think is expected to be day one on everything, or at least that's the rumor, where like Forza Horizon 6 won't be, right? It's going to be Xbox, PC, and then it'll come out on PlayStation later. That's probably just a tech limitation. There's a time and resources thing. So maybe we'll see that. There's a lot of questioning about her previous work with AI at Microsoft. It seems like she's like kind of in that world. And I feel like in some of the old interviews I saw, she's even like, that they did some AI stuff back when she was at Instacart and Facebook as well. But she doesn't seem like the zealot that people have kind of attributed to her. She even said in her initial statement that they don't want to put out like AI slop, which is notable because like 2 weeks earlier, Satya Nadella, the head of Microsoft, talked about how much he hates that term. So maybe that was a little rebellious thing from her or not. I hope it was. I hope that was on purpose. But we'll have to wait and see. The big controversy that's come out now is Kotaku made a big deal out of, she did a weird like podcast a few months ago or last year where they like at the very end of the podcast for like 2 minutes, she talked about how she's worried about birth rates in the United States and in the world, and how she's worried that her kids won't have classmates when they get older. This got picked up on because this is like a big topic amongst like AI weirdos, like the like executives that run like AI companies are like real obsessed with this, and it can like track into like a white supremacist kind of thing. Now, if you can't tell, Asha's Indian. She's not a white person. Of course, all those definitions are different in context, but I don't think she's a supremacist. I suspect that she just has like kind of some weird opinions. And the thing they did point out, which I think was notable, is that she talked about like these like birth rate percentages and stuff like that and how they need to make them better. I think the whole context was that she was saying that AI could make birth rates higher. One, she was wrong about the numbers. And two, that's like, she should just maybe not talk about that stuff. I can agree with that. I will say one of the things when you look into her though, and that is exciting for me, is her work on Facebook Messenger, where when she started working on it, it had around 100 million users, which is like obviously really, really good. And she was part of a team, and I think led the team that pushed an initiative that got them over 1 billion users. That's a big deal. I saw people being like, "Oh, Xbox doesn't need more engagement." I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, literally, you're talking about a company that sells consoles, which they want engagement on those, and that sells a subscription game service. Like, the goal for Xbox for the last 5 years has been engagement. Obviously they're not trying to outsell PlayStation with consoles. They're trying to get more people using their services and paying for their services, and from what we've seen in numbers, that's likely happened, or at least it's more competitive than it's ever been, even if Xbox has sold half the number of consoles, or even less, right? And then, so the kind of culminating thing here with this initial bit of news that came was that Windows Central, which is not associated with Microsoft, they are basically a blog that covers Microsoft news, did an interview with Sharma and Matt Booty, and it was mostly them just reiterating the things I've already talked about. They talked about, getting back to the brand, trying to reinforce things, trying to get games out. People make games. AI, it doesn't make games, hardware talk and all that stuff. My favorite quote from it was, she said, the plan is the plan until it's not the plan. And this was in response to them asking about, doing exclusives and consoles and all this stuff. And I kind of appreciate, this new leadership just acknowledging like, hey, we're going to try stuff. And if it works, we're going to keep doing it. And if it doesn't work, we're not going to do it anymore. And I feel like that's an attitude that has not really been in Xbox for a while. It kind of feels like they've pushed initiatives. Maybe this was a Bond thing. Maybe it was a Phil thing. Maybe it was someone else. We don't even know their name. That they try these initiatives, and maybe on paper they're popular. Maybe they see on their side and the stats and all that, this is a popular thing or whatever. Or maybe not, maybe they're just stubborn and they're just sticking with their plan. At least saying that they have a willingness to be flexible and to change plans and to potentially change things that have been, in the works for a long time is exciting. But like I said before, it's also change, and humans don't like change. So be ready for this to turn around on them. I thought the interview was nice. It wasn't some like hardcore thing. Like Jez doesn't even call himself a journalist. He calls himself a blogger. And that is kind of his role. And I saw people complaining about how this was like too friendly. There wasn't enough pushback. It's like, it was a glorified PR statement. Like, yeah, it was 100%. Like, no one's going to disagree with that. At least I don't think they will. This was the chance for her to do something to reach out to their fans. And a lot of their fans, a lot of Xbox fans, follow Jez, follow Windows Central, because even if he's not always right, even if he whiffs on things, here and there, it does tend to be pretty good information. And heaven forbid a fandom not want to have to look at IGN or VGC or Eurogamer or PC Gamer, who's just constantly dunking and ripping on Xbox. I think often to a point of just it because it's good for clicks, Windows Central like rips on them too. I just think they tend to be more measured about it because of fandom and because, maybe it's just a different way of doing things. One of the most interesting pushbacks on this was from Blessing from Kind of Funny, opened up a daily news show that they do with Kind of Funny called Games Daily, and really just like was really oddly dramatic about this, and like was kind of throwing out like basically, and he's explained it later, of being like, well, I'm really frustrated with Xbox, and I took that out on Jez by like basically dismissing him and like kind of calling this interview bull crap and being just like honestly a huge jerk about it. And the thing is, like basically implying that Jez is too much of like a fanboy and the interview is too soft. And like, sure, I don't completely agree, but say you do agree with those points, that Jez is too close, he's wrong all the time, he's too much of a fanboy of Xbox or Microsoft or whatever. Even if all that stuff is true, even if this was like too soft of an interview, like one, it was just like super unprofessional the way that this was worded, and two, there's a huge amount of hypocrisy there. I like Kind of Funny. It's the most consistent. It's the only blog I've stuck with, or like podcasts and stuff like that over the last like 7 or 8 years that I got onto when I started making content, and I've never stopped watching their stuff. It ebbs and flows. I watch more sometimes, less others. But just in general, they have the softest of softball interviews, no matter who does it. Greg Miller is one of my favorite people in gaming. He's the reason, he's a big inspiration for me doing all the things I do and being involved in the games discussion and things like that. He doesn't do like hardcore interviews, and he was a journalist at one point, and now he's just kind of an entertainer. Kind of Funny is not a journalist outlet. It's an entertainment outlet, kind of like Giant Bomb and stuff like that. And it was just weird. And without getting personal, but of all the people at Kind of Funny to rip on someone else for being biased and having, and being too soft in the interview, like Blessing, sure, he's a cool dude. Not really my type of person. I don't really vibe with him that much, but obviously a ton of people like him. He seems to be very popular amongst his peers, and that's really, really cool. My man has the weakest takes and the shallowest reviews and previews. And I swear he's done some interviews, and they were literally him just like reading questions off of paper, or because that's kind of all, that's kind of his thing. And it's just like kind of like that glass houses argument. Like, you shouldn't be casting stones from a glass house. Like, even if Jez is biased and had a soft interview, you can't, be like weird and really, really like sensational and over dramatic and like kind of mean about that when, like Blessing's probably the most biased person at Kind of Funny, who, in my opinion, has some of the weakest takes and like whenever he's like trying to make a point about a game he played or something, like there's just like nothing there and just like no charisma and stuff like that. It's just, I think you kind of gotta take a step back and take a peek in the mirror and be like, maybe I shouldn't be the one of all people saying this stuff, or maybe I shouldn't say this stuff at all. And then he did like a kind of a half-assed apology the next day. He was like apologizing to like his peers and not really to Jez. Supposedly Jez has been reached out to by, I think, Greg, and they've hashed things out. I think that people should be careful, like I said before, casting stones from glass houses. The last bit here was a day or two after this happened. Seamus Blackley was interviewed. He's one of the original Xbox creators, and we'll get more into it. But he said that he believes that Asha is being brought in to sunset the brand and to slowly put it to sleep and to shut down Xbox, essentially. A few things. Seamus hasn't worked at Xbox in 24 years. He worked there for 4 years. He essentially was a big part of the creation of the hardware of the original Xbox. He is a super cool dude. He has some really, really cool stories. He cares about the Xbox brand a lot. He does. Like, I have no doubt in my mind. He also likes to be interviewed. He likes to hear himself talk. He hasn't, I don't even know if the jobs he's had since then are in the games industry. This isn't really his thing. And he's even followed up in some statements afterwards, I think in Discord or something, of like saying he doesn't think Xbox is dead. Like, he was being dramatic, right? It also doesn't really track. Like, if they were going to have someone do that, honestly, Matt Booty would probably be the leader of Xbox right now. Someone who's already there, who can kind of just take this one on the chin and have to be the person who kind of slowly, brings the brand down, in some capacity, or, whether they get rid of hardware, sell off studios or whatever. Asha, her history, everything about her history is trying to ramp things up, is to try to make things more popular and get more people using things. So it wouldn't make any sense for them to bring her on. The only justification there I've seen is that to just bring in someone unknown and let them be the one that destroys everything. And like, that's fair, right? But, I don't know, like, if you look at her career track, I find it really hard to believe that she would be like, you know what? I've been climbing the corporate ladder for the last 15 years. I'm going to take a job where I shut down one of the most known brands in the world, a NASDAQ top 200 company. Like, if Xbox was its own, company, if it wasn't part of Microsoft, it would still be like one of the biggest companies in the world. I'm going to be the one who shuts them down. I'm sure that's great for my prospects. Like, if that was the plan, now maybe that happens. I have no idea. We have no idea what's going to happen. We're just going to have to wait and see. But I highly, highly, highly doubt she would have signed up for that, because why would she? So, needless to say, to wrap up kind of my thoughts on all this, I'm sad to see Phil go. I think Phil Spencer seems like a cool dude. I'm sad that Sarah Bond didn't get to kind of fulfill what seems like was to be the prophecy. On my extremely shallow judgments of whenever I saw her speak and do interviews and stuff, I kind of suspect she's going to be happy in whatever corporate office she's sitting in. She seemed to have, some genuine care for Xbox. She was especially seemed to care about things like protecting kids online and that kind of stuff. But I don't know that, the way that Phil was such a unique person, where you could see Phil on his Xbox profile, if you follow him, that he plays games like every day. And I'm sure he's playing a bunch now that he's not, the head honcho anymore. But like, he's a gamer who happened to be the head of Xbox. When you look at these, the people in this position on the other platforms, it's not really the case. Do you think Andrew Wilson at EA is a gamer? Do you think the head of 2K Games is a gamer, of Take-Two, and the head of whoever's running Activision? And unfortunately, maybe it'd be better if all these people were gamers, but they're not. Phil was unique, and Asher seems to be making a genuine attempt to kind of immerse herself in the industry and in the culture. But at the end of the day, her position isn't to be the ultimate gamer. Her position is to manage people and manage resources and make big decisions to try to keep the brand that she's running alive, to make her bonus the best it can be next year, right? That can happen lots of ways. Hopefully it happens in ways that we can stomach and we can swallow and that are good for Xbox and good for gaming in general, because right now we're in a bad spot with video games. Funding is lower than it's been in a really long time. Studios are getting shut down. We talked about last week with Blue Point. With PlayStation has shut down multiple studios in the last couple of years, despite the fact that they've sold almost 100 million PlayStation 5s over the last 5 years and are supposedly like killing it. They're like the best brand in the world if you listen to their press statements and their fans. But, shuttering studios and canceling a dozen games and all this stuff, like that's not the sign of a, leading platform in an industry. So if they're struggling and having to do those things, Microsoft's in the same boat. Nintendo kind of does their own thing, but I'm sure they're feeling it too. We're in a rough spot, and this is a time where, hopefully, some new leadership, some fresh eyes can kind of lead them through this tough time, and hopefully there's brighter skies on the other side. So I'm rooting for Asha. I think everything that we've gotten so far from her and Matt Booty is lip service, and we have to see what they're actually going to do, because actions obviously matter more than words. But it's nice for the words to be good and to be different than they've been in a while. And I'm going to take that, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Okay, moving on to the next story. Honestly, that was the big one. We're going to be hitting these last few. So, I've got a handful of stories to talk about. They're going to be quick hitters. So we're going to start off with the Marathon Server Slam and my thoughts. So I've made it to level 10. I want to say that took me 4 or 5 hours. I played a little bit, a decent amount. And, my history with these extraction games is pretty extensive. I played, the Division Survival back when it came out, which isn't exactly like this type of game, but it's definitely like the precursor for sure. I started playing Tarkov, Escape from Tarkov, a few years ago. I have a couple thousand hours racked up in that over the last 5 or 6 years, or whenever I first got it. I played a lot of Arc Raiders, especially before it came out, over multiple years of testing, and then a bunch right before it came out when they did the test, and then a decent amount when the game actually came out. But I kind of got burned out pretty quick, I'll be honest. And then Marathon, I tested it last year when they did the test on the same weekend as Arc Raiders, which was very bad for Marathon, or maybe actually ended up being a good thing for Arc Raider or for Marathon. We'll have to wait and see. So I feel like I have enough experience to kind of give my thoughts on it. Basically, what I will say is that the way Marathon presents now is a billion times better than last year. I thought that the gameplay felt clunky, didn't really explain itself very well. It wasn't a very fun game to play, in my opinion. And that led me to say multiple times, I was worried about Marathon because I felt like it was kind of boring to the core, and that can't really be fixed by them just taking a few extra months. What I will say now is that I don't really still think that, right? I do think the moment-to-moment gameplay is more fun. It is more engaging, and just feels better in general. It's just a first-person shooter that's a PvE game that you do co-op with a couple teammates, and you have a potential for PvP. In that basic formula, I think it's a nice game to play, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it. What I will say is that I think some of my experience kind of plays against me here. Tarkov really burned me out of this type of game. And I could tell that with like Arc Raiders, where I really liked Arc Raiders, but pretty quickly as it got real sweaty, I just lost interest in it because I don't mind the PvP aspect, but I do think these games, people often turn them into like death matches, like a Call of Duty deathmatch, instead of allowing it to be this kind of unique experience where like, your goal when you go into a match of Tarkov or Arc Raiders or Marathon is to complete tasks, is to collect loot, and then get out with that loot after you complete your task, right? You can run into other people. You can have teammates that you work with, obviously, and you can run into strangers, and in theory, you could work with them, or you could just ignore them, or you can fight them, right? And my problem with all these games is that 95% of the time, that those three choices, 95% of the time is fight them. And and that's not always true, right? Like when Tarkov first really implemented their kind of voice over IP system and stuff like that, there was a hot moment where people started to like talk. So you would hear someone else in a building that you were going to loot and be like, hey, is someone in there? And they'd be like, yeah, I'm in here. And you'd be like, hey, I'm just trying to do this task. I'm looking for this gun or whatever. I'm just passing by, or do you have it? And I'll trade you something. And there was a moment of that. And I'm sure it still happens here and there, but not very often. And then it went away. It just went back to being a PvP deathmatch game. Arc Raiders, when Arc Raiders first came out, it was like the co-op game of all time. You could have forgotten in some rounds that there was PvP. And sometimes if someone popped off on PvP, like the entire server would collapse on them and mess them up. And then people would go on about their way, right? And then that changed. People got into the game, they started getting sweaty. I think people started getting bored because it kind of is the same thing over and over again. There wasn't a super extensive list of or number of tasks you could do and things like that. And it just turned into a death match, at least for some people, right? And Marathon is going to be the same way. And Marathon already is that way. So what I noticed when I was playing Marathon was that I want to say until I was level 5, there was a beginner option for the first starting map. And I think what that was was you and your teammates, and then only PvE. And I want to say that there were some robots or AI competitors that looked like other people, but they weren't, but they were AI controlled, because we killed a few of them. And I can't remember if they even looked like the skins, like the frames that are in the game, which are your character models. But basically, I'm pretty sure those first few levels you could play on a map that had no other people on it besides you and your team. And that was so enjoyable. I loved it. The PvE is fun. The AI NPCs that you fight against are really interesting. There's some really, 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 really tough ones. And even the real basic ones have like, they're sneaky, and they do a lot of dodging and moving, and they have like pretty varied ways of fighting you, which I found to be really fun. And then I got out of the beginner range and I started playing the normal maps, and it's been a mixed bag, right? The problem with these games is, like I said before, you're getting in, you're completing the task, you're getting loot, and then you get out with all that stuff, and you get experience, and you level up, and you get access to more gear and more maps and all that stuff. But, you can be in a map for 15, 20 minutes. Luckily, these rounds are short. I'll give them that. But you can be in the round for 15, 20 minutes, have some awesome gear, collect some cool stuff, do your task, and then in a moment's notice, you're just dead. Your whole team's dead, and then you lost most of what you did. You still get some experience and things like that. It is pretty forgiving, especially compared to like a Tarkov, which is extremely punishing when you die. It's just, for me, and it's just reiterating something that I posted about this on social media today. I get the point of these extraction games, the PvE VP, right? I get it. I understand it. And I've even enjoyed it for a long time. Tarkov, I used to love playing that game and dunking on people and tracking people down and killing them, stealing their stuff. And it just got kind of boring to the point where Tarkov has a PvE mode, which there's some impression that more people might be playing the PvE mode than the PvP mode. That might partially be because of cheating as well, but that's a whole different video. That's a whole different story. But I started to play Tarkov PvE and being like, oh man, this is so much better of an experience. The AI sucks. Their AI is real bad. But it was still just a more enjoyable experience because it just felt like a game. And it didn't feel like a game that could just end at any second. And there's people who are really big into like, but that's the tension. That's the best part. Knowing that someone could come out around the corner and kill you. Like, you have to be aware of your surroundings and blah, blah, blah. Like, sure. I don't disagree. I get it. I get why that's the allure for some people. It's just not me, at least not now. Maybe 15 years ago, I'd feel very differently, probably. But that's not who I am today. If I want that experience, I'm playing Battlefield, I'm playing Call of Duty, I'm playing FIFA or something. Like I'm going into an arena where I know everyone's on the same page and we're all just trying to kill each other or capture objectives, whatever. But for these type of games, it's just every time I play them, Tarkov, Arc Raiders, and now Marathon, all I can think about is like, man, I wish I could just play through this entire thing, do all these tasks, and just play with a couple randoms I find or some buddies. And I wish I could just, do these tasks and go into these maps and kill these PvE enemies, and then just extract and just have a slightly stressful but mostly relaxing experience. Like Tarkov, it's a game with some of the best gunplay I've ever played, and just a really crazy amount of intricacy and stuff like that. And it is interesting in its own way. Arc Raiders being one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen, one of the most impressive games I've ever heard. I love the way that the movement mechanics in that game and actually fighting the robots in that game, I think is so fun. But I think fighting the people kind of sucks. It's a third person game where everyone's just like shoulder peeking and stuff like that. I think the PvP is the worst part of Arc Raiders. And I think everything else about Arc Raiders is really, really cool. It has a bunch of cool lore and story they've like kind of hinted to and things. But that's not the focus because now it's just a deathmatch, right? And then I think Marathon's a similar thing. I actually don't like the way Marathon looks. I think it's kind of ugly, if I have to be totally honest. It's like trying too hard to be like, look how futuristic and unique we are. And it's cool for like a minute. But then the 50th time I've seen like a butterfly eating like a worm in the loading screen. And so it's just kind of like, I get it. You're very edgy. Like, I understand. You're very cool and unique. Like, it's a little much in my opinion. And actually some of the textures and stuff are really low quality. Maybe it was just, I'm on Series X playing it. But I noticed when I would die and the enemies would be like on top of me, loot me or whatever, you can just tell that the character models are like, the style lends itself to them not having to make them super, super detailed, but I don't know. This didn't look very good. But that's a different conversation. I can't get over the fact that all of these games I think would be more fun if they were just PvE, or if they were just more like traditional single player games, even Marathon, especially because that's its history. It was a single player game. It was a story based game in previous iterations. So, regardless, I think Marathon is probably not for me. I'm probably not going to buy it. I highly doubt I'm going to play it. Maybe one day, maybe if it comes cheap, maybe if it comes a Game Pass. Wouldn't that be hilarious? I think it will find an audience. It will pull some people from Arc Raiders, I think, because it lends itself more to the deathmatch, to the more competitive, more serious way of playing that I don't think Arc Raiders does. I think that kind of got forced upon Arc Raiders. I think you're going to see a decent number of the people who want Arc Raiders to be more of that like serious PvP experience. I think will like Marathon if they enjoy the other parts of the extraction stuff. I don't think it's going to be like the biggest hit in the world. I suspect Marathon is going to be sustainable. I don't think it's going to get shut down in 3 months. I don't think that Bungie's going to get shuttered because of it. I also would be surprised if it ends up being this like gigantic, huge hit for Sony as well. So, yeah, I think my overall thought is that I think it's going to find an audience. I think it's going to be a sustainable audience. I don't think it's going to be the biggest thing in the world, but I think it's perfectly fine. And like, if you like Bungie games, if you like Destiny, if you want to dabble in an extraction game, or if you're playing like Arc Raiders and you want something maybe, first person, a little more serious, this is probably it. I think it's worth a try. If this weekend, if you can play in the server slam, play it for a couple hours and see what you think. Once I got into the groove of the gameplay loop, I was enjoying it quite a bit. I just don't think it's enough to take me away from Battlefield and from whatever single player game I'm currently replaying for the 50th time. Jason Schreier and John Linneman of Digital Foundry have both kind of separately stated that they're hearing that PlayStation may stop releasing their single player games on PC. They've been releasing those via Steam. There's been some rumors that PlayStation might try to do their own storefront at some point, because then they wouldn't have to pay Steam any money and they could just take all the monies themselves. But that hasn't played out, and we haven't actually seen more evidence of that. This story was interesting because like the Jason Schreier's part of it was people being like, well, if that's true, and him basically clapping back and being like, no, it's true. Like they are pulling back from PC, and him insinuating he has a bigger story either, coming up or whatever. So, it's kind of weird, because I don't really know how, their current strategy hurts them in any way. I suspect at worst it breaks even. At best, they make money. I suspect on it. Some of the PlayStation games have sold really well on PC. Some of them have sold really abysmally. Some really bad. Now, to be fair, at least in the current generation, not many of their first party games are really selling that well on their own console, to be honest. It seems like their people are mostly playing, free to play games or like Madden and 2K every year. But it doesn't seem like PC's been a detriment to them. And if anything, they've kind of held back their own PC possibilities. One of the big problems they have is that, with a few games, like Helldivers, even though that's made by a third party, it's still a first party IP. And Marathon, came out either day one or very quickly on PC. And then Helldivers 2 came out on Xbox, which is really wild in hindsight. But a lot of the times, I want to say with like God of War, maybe The Last of Us, a lot of their first parties take like 3 or more years to come out on PC. And then they put them out, and then they only sell like 1 million copies, and they're like, oh, this is a bad market for our games. It's like, no, it's just everyone's either already played it multiple times, or they forgot about it, and there's no hype left. And then like I remember, I think it was God of War Ragnarok, when it came out on PC, like they didn't advertise it. Like, unless you're hyper connected and really paying close attention to like Sony Santa Monica or Nixxes or whoever, you wouldn't even known it was coming out on PC. And it was this weird thing where they almost were like so reluctant to do it that they like almost like killed it themselves, like by not advertising it and stuff like that. So it is kind of weird. It's that whole meme of the guy, riding his bike with a stick in his hand, and it's saying like PlayStation over him, and him like he sticks the stick in the wheel and he flips over it, and he's like, why? How could the gamers do this to us? And the stick was them taking 3 years to put games on PC. I don't know if they need to do day one. Obviously, they aren't, wanting to do that the way Xbox does. But, the way that they've treated PC is almost the way that Xbox treats PlayStation to a point. And with PlayStation, it turns into this thing where everyone's like, oh, every Xbox game's going to be on PlayStation, so I don't need a PlayStation anymore. Even though that's like categorically not true, at least not yet. And, you just don't see people say that with, PlayStation and PC. Some have. There has been, if you believe it or not, there are like PlayStation fans who hate that they put games out on PC because they think that's like one more PlayStation that didn't get sold. And for some reason, for some people, how many PlayStations are sold is like very important to their soul, right? And it's just such a strange, it's such a strange thing for people to care about when it really has nothing to do with them. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I really believe this, at least not in like a complete pullback. And I will tell you, I will say that this comes at a time when Nixxes, which is a studio Sony owns that makes their PC ports, they're putting out Death Stranding 2 here soon, which is actually coming fairly quickly for PC. I believe it was a longer wait for the first game. Nixxes, their entire job at Sony is to make PC ports of their single player games or of their games, right? So this is going to be kind of an interesting situation where, if they really do pull back from that push, Nixxes is probably done. They're probably gone. So we'll see. I don't expect this to be fully true, but weirder things have happened. We had a Pokemon showcase for 2026. Here's how I'll put it. It was a bunch of dumb bullshit of overpriced, random, stupid mobile game stuff and dumb little cards that play songs on an old looking Game Boy for $70. Bunch of bullcrap. And then at the very end, they announced Pokemon Wind and Water. And it is the first Switch 2 exclusive Pokemon game. It's targeting a 2027 release date, and it looks fantastic. And if you've heard me talk about Nintendo first-party games or Nintendo in general, you'll know I'm not a big fan. I wanted to buy a Switch 2 so bad, and then when I saw the Switch 2 and the products that were coming out on it, I was completely uninterested. This legit is the first thing I've seen that's made me be like, ooh, maybe I need a Switch 2. And I probably need it sooner than later because they're probably going to be raising their prices sooner than later. Yeah, it looks great. Like it looks like a really good looking PS4 game. And then I say that as a compliment because compared to what they've been releasing for years at this point, and gameplay is what matters. A lot of people will defend the games that Switch has and Switch 2 has, and that's completely fair. All good. I'm just saying from an outside observer, this is the first like Pokemon game I've seen that looks like a modern game. Now we'll see how it runs. We'll see how it actually looks when it comes out. We'll see if, trees 15 feet away pop in like they do on the current games. But it is one of the first games since the Switch 2 came out that's made me go like, ooh, I might need a Switch 2. And the starting Pokemon are super adorable. I love the little weirdo water guy with his like little salamander eyes or whatever. Then we had Resident Evil Requiem. The 9th game has released. It has an Open Critic score of 88. I watched someone streaming it last night for like an hour or so. It just looks really cool. I'm not big on games that switch you from one character perspective to another. So this one is, what's her name? Of course, I'm going to forget right now. I want to say Kate or Claire or something like that. You're playing an FBI agent whose primary ways of interacting with the world is sneaking around and things like that. And then on the other hand, you're also playing as Leon Kennedy, who's like a legendary character in the Resident Evil franchise, who is just kicking things and shooting everything and all that. So two very different play styles. That kind of turns me off the game a little bit, because I just want to play as Leon. I don't want to play as both of them. But from what I've seen, it looks really, really good. It looks like incredible. The graphics look amazing. The gameplay looks fun. So we'll see. I may get it eventually. We'll see about that. One of the cool notes about it, though, that it seems like it was embargoed until today, when I'm recording this on Friday, is that this is the first implementation of Sony using their PSSR2, which is their PlayStation 5 upscaler. Now, not to sound bitter or anything, or like a little petty Xbot or anything, but PSSR2, Sony loves to put their own little names on like tech that other people made. And this appears to be FSR like 3.5. So FSR 4 is the newest upscaler that AMD uses in their graphics cards. And it requires some very specific hardware to use all of its tools. So PlayStation 5 Pro does not have all that hardware. And so it has some of it. So therefore, they're able to put some of this, like these newest features, which are really, really good. They're comparable to DLSS in a way. That's NVIDIA's upscaler tech. And supposedly the PlayStation 5 Pro is able to do some pretty cool stuff with this. But it's just, I think it's funny how they can't stand to use someone else's technology to label. So they have to label it their own. And it's this whole like Amethyst project where, PlayStation has worked with AMD very special to make this work. It's like literally they've just worked with their team to see what parts of FSR 4 can work on the PS5 Pro and just disable the parts that can't. And now they're going to use it in games. It seems like it's working pretty well, at least on this game, and it will be retroactive for others as time goes on. My big question is that at least some of that FSR tech, and especially the 3.0 FSR, could definitely be used in the PlayStation 5 base and the Xbox Series X and S, because I think they mostly only use like FSR 2 level stuff. So I'm curious if we'll see any of this stuff cross over to the older consoles. I suspect that if it's up to PlayStation, they won't. They very much like to make sure that they have these little differences between their products that, they want you to buy that PS5 Pro. The Steam Deck is going up 15,000 yen in Japan. That's about $100. This kind of plays into the fears people have had for a while that we may or may not see that Steam machine. And honestly, even those other products that Steam and Valve teased last year, the controller, the headset, all of those things, especially the headset, are going to be using CPUs and, these memory chips and all that stuff. I am of the opinion at this point that we will never see the Steam machine that was advertised to us in 2025. I don't think that product is ever going to come out. I think in 3 or 4 years, we'll see them release a more like an updated version of that with the goal of it coming in at a good price, having a good performance level. But I think that product we saw in 2025 just isn't realistic at this point. It's going to be like $1,200 or $1,300, and no one's going to want to pay that for a machine that in theory is less powerful than the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. So, I think this is probably not a great sign for that, but I do still think in the future we'll get something from them. As we wrap up here, please excuse my hilariously red nose. I've been having to blow my nose in between some of these stories, and that's just where I'm at. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice as well. Nacon files for insolvency, and that could lead to multiple known studios that have seemingly successful games being without a publisher and likely being in trouble of shutting down. I want to say this was like a remnant from the ashes. Their studio is under Nacon. The Hell Is Us that just came out that a lot of people seem to like is under them. There's a handful of like really notable studios that made like really solid like AA games in the last couple of years that are under Nacon, and unless Nacon can find a way to get funding and stay alive, they're gone, and that puts these studios in a really rough spot, especially if they're in the middle of making DLC or new games and stuff. Like they'll lose their funding, and so in the funding crisis we currently have, this is not the time that you want to lose that. So this is one of those things that I'm always going to root for these studios, even if I'm not a huge fan of the games they have, because the more of those like middle level studios we lose, the worse things are, because over the next like 5 to 10 years, those are going to be the studios putting out games. It's going to be hard for little tiny indies, and it's going to be hard for big giant AAA studios to make stuff for a while. And it's these little kind of medium sized studios I root for, and this sucks. Okay, we got our first shot from the set of the God of War TV show, and it looks real bad. It looks so awful. Now, to be fair, this is without them. It's not in motion. This is without all the post-production. This was without editing, all the film and all that. I hope it's not the final design of the way they look. Old Kratos, my man might need to put a few more hours in the gym. He's looking a little doughy. As a doughy boy, I feel like I'm allowed to say that. The boy, he looks like he's like 7 years old. And I thought that in the game that he was like at least like 11 or 12, if not a hair older. Like he looks like an Ewok. I'm just throwing it out there. This child looks like an Ewok out there with his little bow and arrow. And I don't know. I still, and people were joking about this. I'm kind of serious about it. The image looks AI generated. It doesn't look real. It looks fake. It's probably being run through filters, or it's like been heavily edited or something, is my honest guess. But it looks like all of those generative AI images you see where it's like, in theory, they look realistic, but just your brain can just tell something's off. That's exactly how I felt about this. And I don't know. Well, I'm sure you could have gotten shots of the Fallout show that made you think this exact same thing. And, I'll reserve judgment, and I want this to be good because it's Amazon, and I want them to make a good God of War game because that makes me more, or TV show, because that makes me more confident the Mass Effect show could look good, and be good, because the Fallout show is so great. But this doesn't, get me excited, but that's fine. I'll be patient. We'll have to wait and see. And then finally, we have the first 2 episodes of the Scrubs revival. This isn't gaming related, but it's my show. I'll talk about what I want. If you watched Scrubs back in the day, it's been off the air for like 15, 20 years at this point. The first 2 episodes of the revival are really, really good. They've kept the old nostalgia. They've kept a lot of the bits and stuff like that, the feel of the original show, but they've done a good job kind of bringing it up to a modern standard. The biggest thing is the cast from the old show. Some of them aren't there a whole lot, but the ones that are great, and they definitely bring back that old feeling. But the interns, the new people on the show, are extremely good, and that's the way this show will be successful. And they've done a good job, at least here in this first year. So hopefully we get more seasons of this. It's only like 9 episodes, which the old seasons were like 30 episodes back in the day, or it's like 25 or 30. It was a lot, and that's not the case anymore. So that's not how shows work anymore. Unfortunately, they're much smaller than that. But I've enjoyed the first 2 episodes. So if you were a Scrubs fan back in the day, or if you're just catching up on it now, this is definitely worth watching. The one word of warning is that season 9 of the original series was a spinoff called Med School. This new series it pretends season 9 never happened. So things that happened in season 9, the people being married and having babies and all that stuff, never have happened. This is taking place in the aftermath of season 8. So to just be warned there. And one of the cool things is the first episode has one of the highest IMDb ratings ever, and it's almost perfect. It was like a 9.8 the last time I looked. So it's cool. If you like the show back in the day, it's definitely worth checking out. As for content updates, there's not a lot. I'm obviously sick. I have been for a week or so. Other people in the house have been before that. I've been real busy with work. It's kind of a crazy time of the year. There's stuff going on in the house. Real life happens as well. So, streams, extra podcasts, videos, all that stuff will happen as I can do it. Streams are the thing I'm struggling with the most. I've still been able to put out videos here and there, and obviously keep doing the podcast. I want to stream. I love streaming. I started the year off so well. It's just unfortunately, that's the first thing to go. And that's just kind of the situation I'm currently in. I wanted to do it this weekend, but my voice is gone. I'm going to lose it after this. And then I have a gala I'm going to for some stuff that I'm doing in real life. And it's just, I'm adulting over here, and I'm doing my best. So please be patient. Other stuff will be coming. The year is young. We have plenty of time to get things done. We'll keep doing the thing. Finally, if you have any questions or feedback, hit me up on social media at baundiesel or at the baunfire. Join my Discord via the Linktree link in the episode description, or comment on my Spotify or YouTube. I read every one of them. I reply to almost every single one, unless it doesn't need a reply. But that is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gamescast. So until next time.